We start our journey in Mantua, one of the great Renaissance cities of Italy. Moving south and across the River Po, we come to the town of Parma, also known as the Golden City. At Maranello, we'll visit Ferrari's famous factory and test track before heading to Bologna and its fascinating medieval skyscrapers. Making our way to the Adriatic coast, we stop at the ancient port town of Ravenna. It's then on to one of the biggest and best-known beach resorts in Europe, Rimini. We turn inland once more towards one of the smallest countries in the world, San Marino, before ending our journey at the formidable hilltop fortress of San Leo. Surrounded by these grand artificial lakes, Mantua is considered a true gem of the Italian Renaissance. In its day, the city was a major hub of arts and culture in northern Italy. Dominating the skyline is the imposing dome of Sant'Andrea. Its significance as a major work of 15th century architecture, though, is shadowed by the church's religious importance. Because directly under the dome is a crypt containing a relic that's believed to have been soaked with the blood of Christ. Each year on Good Friday, it's brought out on the streets in holy procession. The sheer passion and romance of Mantua seems irrepressible. It is, after all, to this very city that Shakespeare's Romeo was banished, and where he later heard of the death of Juliet. Mantua's golden days began in the 14th century when it came under the control of the Gonzaga family, one of Italy's great Renaissance dynasties. One fine example of the architecture they commissioned is the Palazzo del Te. Nestled in the suburbs, it was constructed for the Marquess Federico Gonzaga in the early 16th century. It took 10 years and many hundreds of labourers to build. At the time of the palazzo's completion, it sat outside the city walls to be used by the Gonzaga family as a pleasure palace. The architecture is in the Mannerist style, encompassing the various ideals of harmony and imaginative rhythms. This approach, which was trumpeted by artists such as Michelangelo, sought to represent illusionary effects through disproportionate shapes. Although various wars since then have brought damage and neglect to the Palazzo del Te, it remains a fine example of Mantua's strong artistic legacy. The city's 3 lakes were designed to function as a massive defensive moat. And if that wasn't enough to deter an enemy attack, there was yet more protection. Resting near the shore of the Lago di Mezzo, or Middle Lake, is the San Giorgio Castle. Another commission from the Gonzaga family, the fortress was built in the 14th century to defend the city and establish military dominance in the area. It's austere but elegant, featuring 4 corner towers, a drawbridge, and yet another moat. Such heavy defences secured it as a place of refuge during an attack or siege. The castle eventually became part of the ducal palace and a treasure house of artwork. For centuries, it had held back invaders. But it was an earthquake in 2012 that caused most damage, leading to closure of parts of the building. A network of corridors and galleries connect the larger complex of the ducal palace, where the Gonzaga family took up residence between the 14th and 17th centuries. It's a magnificent display of wealth and power, with over 500 rooms covering 34,000 square meters. These arches and columns were typical of the more grandiose buildings of the High Renaissance. A movement born in Italy where art and architecture were created to appeal to both emotion and reason, and were lavishly supported by nobility and the rich. Simplicity of vision and clarity were the classical ideals that underpinned many areas of life and led to the creation of places like the Palazzo. More than a royal residence, it was a work of art, full of high concepts and deep meanings. Heading south, we cross the River Po, whose banks have been inhabited since Neolithic times. It leads us to the town of Parma, a settlement founded by a group of 2,000 Romans as part of a colonization project in 183 BC. For many centuries, it enjoyed wealth and riches, and during those prosperous times was known as Chrysopolis, or the Golden City. While it's unclear whether this was due to its location in a rich, fertile area or to its treasury filled with gold, it was unequivocally a thriving centre of trade and innovation. In 1561, British diplomat William Thomas described the place as a remarkable city located between the hills of the Apennines and the River Po, with pastures so tasty and sweet that the name of Parma is known everywhere. The streets look as though they've been dipped in honey. Overlooking the heart of the city is Parma Cathedral. A basilica has stood on this site from as early as the 6th century, with a fortified church erected 3 centuries later. A devastating earthquake in 1117 almost completely destroyed the building, but it was painstakingly restored to its original splendor. Then, in the late 13th century, the 63-meter-high Gothic belfry was raised. Alongside stands the cathedral's distinctive octagonal baptistry, commissioned towards the end of the 12th century. Though little is known about its architect, Benedetto Antelami, the elegance of this structure speaks volumes about his mastery over design. But sadly, he wouldn't have been around long enough to see its completion. Clad in striking pink marble, it took 130 years to complete, not least because of the city's long dispute with Verona, the suppliers of the prized marble. Today, it stands as one of the most important medieval monuments in Europe, since it marks the architectural transition from Romanesque to Gothic. Just east of Parma, it's back to the present and cutting-edge automotive engineering. This factory at Maranello has been home to Ferrari and its iconic sports cars since the 1940s. Covering 23,000 square meters, the buildings house over 3,000 workers, all striving to perpetuate Enzo Ferrari's dream, to build the ultimate car that combines performance with elegance. It seems he succeeded. Today, these supercars are the definitive statement of status, wealth, and of course, prowess. It's a far cry from the World War II years when the Ferrari company survived producing machine tools for the military. But not long after the war, cars started to churn out at a rapid pace, winning a string of international races. Many of Ferrari's racing legends would have tested their mettle here on the factory's private track, the famous Fiorano circuit. Since it was built in 1972, it's undergone a number of changes to best simulate the most demanding of Grand Prix circuits. First and foremost, it's a test track for their production cars. High-tech scanners line the length and breadth of the circuit. A large skid pan tests tyres and handling, with advanced sprinklers that can soak the tarmac in minutes. As well as guided tours around the factory, lucky customers, who may have spent over $400,000 for the latest top model, get to drive their new cars around the track. But it's unlikely they'll match Michael Schumacher's record lap time of 55.999 seconds, set in 2004. A little further southeast, we come to this extraordinary structure that is one of the longest roofed arcades in the world. 666 arches, stretching 3.5 kilometers, lead up the side of the hill to the sanctuary of the Madonna of San Luca. The Basilica Church perches 300 meters over the regional capital, Bologna. The sanctuary was originally built to house the icon of the Madonna, while the purpose of the arcade was to shelter the relic on its long journey up the hill. It demonstrates what the devout locals were willing to spend on a structure to house their patron saint. The lavish Baroque-style basilica was begun in the 17th century, funded by various popes, until it was finally completed in 1950. The peaceful tranquility of this place is momentarily interrupted by the roar of the jet-powered motor of this squirrel helicopter. It's headed for Bologna, one of the wealthiest cities in Italy, and it's also our next stop. The standout feature of Bologna is the sheer number of covered walkways. Known as porticos, they provide shelter from the rain or snow, as well as a feeling of being encapsulated in history. Even the great English writer Charles Dickens noted the cool charm of the arcades. In his book, Pictures from Italy, he writes, "Well, thanks to God, it's very cheerful, how green it is, how cool it is, it's quite a meadow." Another unique feature of Bologna's cityscape are the huge towers that rise up through the buildings and arcades. Once numbering 180, it's thought that these curious medieval skyscrapers were built by wealthy families simply as status symbols. Later, they served as prisons, shops, and even residences. The most famous of these are known as the Two Towers. The taller one is called the Asinelli, while the smaller, less upright tower is named the Garisenda. Great wooden poles that have been hammered into the ground provide the foundations and have somehow kept them safely aloft for centuries, though only just, it seems. As the stone walls climb upwards, the blocks become thinner and lighter. It may have taken up to 10 years to build a typical tower to a height of 60 meters. Over the years, the towers have been used for various scientific experiments on the motion of falling and the Earth's rotation. They were also described in Dante's Divine Comedy as bending and leaning through the clouds. It's strange to imagine that Bologna's skyline was once covered in these tall square monoliths, with the inhabitants peering down to the streets below. we now head southwards to the famous San Marino Grand Prix circuit. Originally constructed in 1950 for car manufacturers to test their prototypes, the track went on to host Formula One for over 20 years. It's also known for a tragic event in racing, as it was here in 1994 that Brazilian racer Ayrton Senna lost his life in a freak accident. Regarded as one of the greatest drivers of all time, the triple world champion lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a retaining wall. Chances are he would have survived were it not for a piece of metal penetrating his helmet. He died from a critical head injury at a hospital in Bologna only hours later. The track is no longer used for Formula One. Nearby is Ravenna, a city connected to the Adriatic Sea by the Candiano Canal. Its rise to power came in the 1st century BC under the Emperor Augustus, who built a port and naval base here. As the capital of the Western Roman Empire, it continued to thrive for several hundred years. It later served as both the capital of the Ostrogoth Empire and the seat of Byzantine government in Italy. Many of the buildings still evoke the town's Eastern heritage. Even Oscar Wilde, the famous 19th century writer and wit, was taken by its ancient charm, writing, "I saw that holy city rising clear, crowned with her crown of towers." These unique architectural features and the mosaics that adorn them have earned Ravenna the status of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Candiano Canal connects the town centre to the sea 12 kilometres away. With shipyards, cargo ports, and a major petrochemical plant, this waterway is as important now as ever it was. 2,000 years ago, a massive Roman fleet was stationed here, instrumental in maintaining control of the Mediterranean basin as well as surrounding cities. Today, the traffic is more for commerce and leisure. A passenger terminal offers cruises to other Italian destinations as well as Croatia. Out towards the sea, we come to the wetlands and lagoons that characterize Ravenna's shores. These wild, unspoiled beaches mark the southern end of the vast natural reserve that is the Po Delta Park. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as well as a paradise for birdwatchers. But all that changes as we approach Italy's Adriatic Riviera. A seemingly endless line of breakwaters protect beaches from erosion, as well as the interest of the region's biggest industry, tourism. And seaside towns don't come much bigger than Rimini. It is one of the best known resorts in Italy. We've arrived off-season. During the peak months of July and August, these golden beaches heave with holidaymakers. Its success today belies a history of ups and downs. The town was devastated during World War II, but rapid rebuilding saw visitors from all over Europe returning in their droves. In the 1970s, it fought off fierce competition from other major resorts by remodeling itself as an entertainment capital with theme parks, arcades, and clubs. It was a formula that proved a hit with Italians themselves, who now make up over 80% of those choosing Rimini as their holiday destination. Just inland, but worlds away from the bustle of the coastal towns, lies one of the smallest countries in the world. An enclave of only 60 square kilometres, this is the Republic of San Marino. It's reputed to be one of the world's wealthiest places when comparing its small population of just over 30,000 to its rich and stable economy. The capital city, also called San Marino, has its ancient centre sitting atop this 700-metre cliff edge. Throughout the walled town are long, winding cobblestone streets, many of which prohibit motor vehicles. Its population of only 4,000 is vastly outnumbered during the holiday seasons by visitors coming to enjoy the sights as well as tax-free shopping. On its northeastern edge lies the basilica dedicated to the founder of the city, St. Marinus. As a Christian, he's believed to have fled from Roman persecution, finding refuge here on Mount Titano in the year 301 AD. The story continues that the Christian community he founded here was bequeathed the land by a sympathetic owner, on condition that they always remain united. Apparently they did. The city flourished until it was granted full independence in 1296. This makes San Marino one of the oldest surviving republics in the world. And no trip to the city is complete without visiting its most popular tourist attraction, Goyeta Fortress. For 1,000 years, this striking castle has stood on the rock's edge, guarding all it surveys. Goyeta is the oldest and tallest of 3 such towers surrounding the city and are depicted on the national flag. A fitting symbol for the pride and heritage of the place and its people. In 2008, both country and capital were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site as a testimony to the continuity of a free republic since the Middle Ages. We complete our journey just across the border and back on Italian soil, at the ancient town of San Leo. Located on this enormous spur would have made accessing the settlement quite a task for early invaders. But rather than deterring enemies, it made it even more tempting. The cliff-edge fortress that watches over the town was constantly fought over until the mid-15th century, when it was finally conquered by Federico de Montefeltro. When the papacy took control of San Leo in the 17th century, the fortress was used not so much to keep people out as to keep them in. It served as a harsh, forbidding prison right up until 1906. Later, it was to become a museum, housing an extensive collection of armour and weaponry. Today, both fortress and town hold frequent community events and celebrations. At the end of June, San Leo hosts a festival of street artists and markets in remembrance of St. Francis, who visited the town in 1213. There's also the curious Festival of Alchemy. With lively street parties and fireworks, it celebrates both science and sorcery. But it's certainly hard to imagine anything that can make San Leo more magical than it already is. A perfect place to end this journey.